You know that moment in a book when the hero storms into the room, says absolutely nothing, and yet somehow everyone, including you, knows that he's in charge? You can thank the 1980s for that. Welcome to Reading Under the Covers, a romance novel podcast where we chat, fangirl, and maybe even swoon over our latest reads. I'm Francesca from Under the Covers book blog, and today we are digging into the roots of one of romance's most iconic figures, the alpha hero. This episode is part of something a little bit bigger that I've been working on, and that is a brand new Substack series called Once Upon a Genre, where we take a walk through the decades of romance and look at the evolution of the romance genre as a whole. We kicked things off last Friday with the 1970s, which is the bodice ripper era, where things got a little bit wild and the modern romance novel was born. But this week we're going full glamour, and it's time to talk about the 1980s, because if the 1970s cracked the door open for bold and dramatic romance, the 1980s kicked it down in designer heels, and those were probably owned by a secretary in love with her powerful boss. One of those characteristics of the 1980s was the alpha hero. And that is basically what we're going to be discussing here today: the alpha hero, where it came from, how it's evolved, and a look at the 1980s power couples. So let's talk alpha heroes first. What made the 1980s romance hero so alpha? The first thing to say is that the alpha hero didn't start in the 1980s. We had alpha vibes back in Gothic romances in the 1960s and even in those early historical bodice rippers. But the 80s are where the alpha became a formula. There was a blueprint and it became a trope that you could spot a mile away, and it often came in a sharply tailored suit. This is the decade of the CEOs, the sheiks, the powerful ranch owners. These men were rich. I'm talking cartoonishly rich. They had their emotional walls so high that they needed a full demolition crew to get in, or, maybe just a sharp, emotionally intelligent heroine to bring it all crashing down. These men, they didn't talk about their feelings. They just brooded. They were grumpy. Sometimes they were just jerks. But the one thing they all had was their obsession. Of course, that obsession was generally the heroine, and that is what readers kept coming back for. If you've read a hero who can't express basic emotion but will fly a woman across the globe just to make a point, that is straight out of the 1980s romance books. But the alpha wouldn't be as compelling without someone that is equally as interesting on the other side. And this is where the 80s power couple dynamic really comes into play. The heroines of the time, they weren't all shrinking violets. Sure, some of the caretakers were innocent. That kind of virgin tycoon combo was everywhere. But just as often, they were ambitious. They were career women trying to make it in a man's world. Maybe they were taking over the family business. Maybe they were journalists and lawyers and doctors. They were trying to do it all while navigating the push and pull with a hero who absolutely did not know how to handle his feelings. What made these couples pop was the power dynamic. There was always some kind of struggle in the power difference. It was a boss and secretary, a billionaire nanny, arranged marriages, marriages of convenience, age gaps where the man was jaded and the woman still believed in love. These weren't healthy relationships by modern standards, but they were intense, they were messy, and they were full of emotional warfare that the readers at the time devoured. This was definitely an era of control versus vulnerability, dominance versus defiance, obsession versus denial. These couples didn't just fall in love, they unraveled each other, and honestly, readers just ate that up. This was also the era of glamour. So let's not forget how extra everything was in the 1980s. Romances were all about jet setting to private islands. They took place in mansions, fashion houses, corporate high-rises, and luxury ranches that felt like mini empires. We're not talking about a cozy small town backdrop here like we know of today. This was Harlequin Presents, Silhouette Desire. That was category romance, and it was totally booming in the 1980s. And it's one of the reasons why the alpha hero cemented itself as one of the main character types of the times. Pretty much every single hero in a category romance in the 80s was an alpha hero. These books flew off the shelves or the spinner racks because they were short. They were about 180 pages, but they were packed full of angst, emotional stakes, and drama like no other. They were addictive, they were absolutely everywhere: grocery stores, pharmacies, at every checkout lane, wherever women were shopping, which was not browsing the bookstores. That's where you would find category romance, and they were completely flying off of those shelves. Some of the names that you might recognize of the times are Charlotte Lamb, who wrote over 100 category romances, so many alpha heroes, so many emotionally repressed men that were undone by love. Penny Jordan, an icon of Harlequin Presents, whose books had exotic settings, intense emotion, and some forbidden tension for days. Sandra Brown, before she pivoted into romantic suspense, she gave us hot mess alpha men and heroine who did not back down. Judith McNaught, who is best known now for her historicals, but she also wrote Whitney My Love, which was peak 80s alpha hero energy, and we'll come back to that. Diana Palmer, who put cowboy romance on the alpha map with her ranchers who ran their land like CEOs and had about the emotional range of a teaspoon. And Johanna Lindsey, who shifted from bodice rippers to the full-blown 80s melodrama with books like Tender is the Storm. So much kidnapping, so much tension. Now, for a quick history sidebar here, and a really important one, we can't talk about the rise of category romance in the 80s or even the alpha hero without talking about Vivian Stephens, one of the first Black editors in mainstream publishing and who helped launch the Harlequin American line. She worked also with Dell, and really what made her different was that she wanted stories where emotions drove the romance, not just the plot. That meant that we got deeper character conflict, more emotionally complex heroes, and heroines with real agency. Vivian Stephens helped shape what the modern romance hero looked like, and she gave early opportunities to voices that publishing had long ignored, including Sandra Kitt, who became the first Black woman published by Harlequin. She also helped found the RWA, and while that organization had a complicated and often exclusionary legacy and is now no longer in existence, her contributions to the genre are unshakable. Without Vivian's editorial vision and her belief in emotional, character-driven romance, the 80s boom and those iconic alphas might have looked really different today. A side note here also for the boom of the cowboy romance, because yes, even cowboys went alpha. We usually think of cowboys now as this soft, gruff charm, but in the 80s, cowboy romance was not immune to the alpha boom. As I've mentioned before, Diana Palmer's heroes were quite emotionally constipated alpha males, but they would protect their heroine with everything they had, often while pretending that they didn't care at all. So cowboy romance in this era wasn't about the open fields and the sweet courtship. It was legacy land, inheritance drama, and emotional repression. So there was a whole lot of pining. Now let's give you some recommendations if you're ready to handle some 1980s true vintage alpha heroes. Let's break down a few books that define the power couple dynamic of the times. One book that really feels like it kicked off the emotional alpha vibe, even though technically it came out in the late 70s, is The Boss's Virgin by Charlotte Lamb. It's got all the bones of what we would see in an 80s alpha hero romance: a powerful older boss, a younger secretary, some major emotional repression, and a heroine who ends up unraveling him. You can almost feel the formula that is about to take off from there. Whitney My Love by Judith McNaught. Historical, yes, but it reads like an 80s drama. Whitney is headstrong and rebellious. Clayton is the original alpha. He's arrogant, controlling, jealous, and obsessed. It's epic and emotional, but it's also messy and, yes, controversial, because there's a particular scene in this book that gets talked about a lot. It's one of those books that did help define the modern alpha with a willful heroine formula. Now, if you normally think of Sandra Brown by her romantic suspense books of today, how about Tempest in Eden by Sandra Brown with an artist meets preacher? She is a nude model. He's extremely not ready for that, and there's lots of sparks that fly between them. Secrets unravel, and it's a classic example of opposites attract with emotional tension. Or Breakfast in Bed by Sandra Brown with a heroine that is running a bed and breakfast and a hero who is a writer. They are stuck together in close quarters. It's angsty, it's hot, and of course they don't want to fall in love with each other because it's all wrong, but they do because it's also all right. Now, if you want that cowboy alpha, Calhoun by Diana Palmer is textbook definition of a cowboy alpha. He's gruff, he's mean, he's in denial about his feelings, and she's the girl next door that he doesn't want to want. packed. The tension in this one is off the charts. And for classic 80s melodrama, Tender is the Storm by Johanna Lindsey. We have kidnapping, revenge, arranged marriage. This book is incredibly dramatic, but also incredibly problematic, but somehow it worked at the time. So if you want your romance to leave you with your jaw on the floor, this one escalates quickly. Now, we've spent a lot of time hanging out in the 1980s because that was the foundation for our alpha hero, but let's zoom out a little bit. What happened after this original alpha era? Because even though the 80s alpha hero was dominant, pun intended, romance didn't just stay stuck in that mold forever. In the 1990s, we saw the alpha get a little bit softer. Not a lot, but a little bit. Think of Julie Garwood and heroes who were still powerful, but we started to see a little bit more tenderness, a little bit more banter. Heroines actually started calling them out on their crap, and the readers absolutely loved that. Then in the 2000s, we hit the paranormal boom. Enter the vampire alphas, the demon lords, the shifter packs. These guys were so possessive to the max, but the stories often gave more space for some emotional growth. Now, when you think of paranormal creatures, you think absolute alphas, but we also saw the heroines become just as powerful as our heroes. We started to see more of the alpha protector, still dominant and still broody, but way more ride or die energy. By the 2010s, dark romance came into its own, and it brought with it a whole new version of the alpha hero. These are morally gray, a bit violent, complex, and sometimes completely unredeemable, but also they are more layered. The emotional repression is still there, but now it came with some trauma backstories, with some therapy plot lines sometimes, and whole character arcs built around learning how to love without control. And now in the 2020s, we're seeing the pendulum swing again. We still get alpha heroes, and we always will, but readers are now embracing the beta hero in a way that we haven't really seen before. The cinnamon roll, the emotionally available man, the one who's already in touch with his feelings, and he falls first, plus he falls hard, or we even get grumpy heroes who are emotionally intelligent. He knows he's a mess, he's trying, and he might even go to therapy for it. So lots of growth. It's like we took the best parts of the alpha, the loyalty, the competence, the emotional intensity, and then we ditched all of the toxic stuff, or at least we made some space to unpack it. Honestly, it's such a fun time to be a romance reader because whether you love your heroes super alpha, beta, morally gray, or a little cinnamon roll, they all trace back to the 1980s formula in some way or shape. So here's the big question. Is the 1980s alpha hero still around? Honestly, I think yes. He's just evolved. Today, he can be a mafia don, a morally gray vampire, a grumpy sunshine hero, but the DNA of the original alpha is still there. There is dominance, control, obsession, and a slow unraveling when love hits that we absolutely love. The difference is that now we interrogate it. We remix that trope, we give the heroine more agency, and we talk about it when it's problematic, which is honestly a really good thing. If you want to dive deeper into the actual history of the 1980s, how Harlequin and Silhouette shaped the era, the rise of the category romance boom, and the authors that defined the decade, I've got you covered. This Friday's edition of the Once Upon a Genre series on Substack is all about the 1980s romance boom, all of the deep dives, cover evolutions, and more. So I encourage you to subscribe for free to the Substack at underthecoverscommunity.com. And if you haven't checked out yet the 1970s deep dive, I will leave that linked in the show notes down below so you can check it out. I would love to know your thoughts on the alpha hero. Do you love it? Do you hate it? Do you prefer today's version of the alpha hero, or do you miss some parts of the more problematic alpha heroes of the past? Have you read any of these 1980s alpha hero books, and what were your favorites? Leave all of that in the comments. I would love to chat with you guys about all of that. And as always, if you are tuning in from YouTube, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that bell notification so you don't miss any content from us. But for today, that's all I have for you guys. I hope you find something wonderful to read this week, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye!